Hello, everyone. My name is Lionel Senner from Pembroke Publishers, and thanks for joining us this evening for our session on mindfulness from our presenters, Shelley Murphy and Lisa Bush. Before we get started, just a quick note that if you have any technical issues, please feel free just to drop a note into the chat with the start at Lionel, and I'll be able to help you out right away and get you organized. Also, a note that this session is being recorded, and you will get an email in about 24 hours indicating how to access that recording. And if you'd like to share that with your colleagues, that would be great as well. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker tonight, Shelley Murphy. Shelley is a former classroom teacher and is now a lecturer and researcher at OISE through the University of Toronto. She has extensive training in the science and practice of trauma-sensitive mindfulness and has been a mindfulness practitioner and educator for over 20 years. Shelley developed and teaches the Mindfulness in Education course at OISE and is the recipient of a Mindful Society's 2019 Michelle Chabon Spirit of Leadership Award for her work and research in the field. Her book on mindfulness for children in classroom settings and beyond, called Fostering Mindfulness, was published by Pembroke in 2019. So as we start this school year of I guess craziness, Shelley, might be the best way to describe it in some ways. It sounds like to take some time here and sort of explore some of your ideas and your thoughts is perfect timing to give us some direction as we move forward into this new school year. So Shelley, I'll pass it over to you and welcome. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Lionel. Great to be here. And thank you to Pembroke for bringing us together for this, I think, very important topic, as so many of us, and I see some names that I recognize, so many of us returning to teaching in this unprecedented time. So I'm happy to be here with Lisa Bush as well, who's written a wonderful book called Teaching Well, and she'll be with you later on in the webcast. I'm here to talk to you about, we're both going to be talking about self-care for teachers and students in a time of challenge and change. And I particularly will be talking about mindfulness and how that might be a resource for some of us. So as Lionel mentioned, I was a classroom teacher. That's me in my first grade classroom. And I was first introduced to mindfulness in the late 90s. And because I noticed the benefits for me, I ended up bringing it into my teaching. So since then, it's been a part of what I do, both in my personal life and my professional life. And I bring it into my teaching as a teacher educator at OISE University of Toronto, where I teach courses in well-being, special education literacy, and a course in mindfulness in education and the well-being emphasis. And as Lionel mentioned as well, last year my book on fostering mindfulness in the classroom and beyond was published through Pembroke. Just a quick overview. I imagine that many of you are here because you're called to focus on your own well-being and the well-being of your students, hopefully thinking about self-care and turning that towards yourself. That is the definition of self-care. So we're going to talk a little bit about self-care, how mindfulness is an act of self-care. And then I want to share just a couple of strategies and practices with you, and then some resources that I think might be of interest to you. So it wasn't that long ago that I was in the classroom, and I still remember coming back from summer vacation and saying hello to my teaching colleagues, and we would be in awe and just completely surprised at how good we looked, how well we seemed. It was almost shockingly surprising how well we thought we each looked. And this happened year after year. And what I realized after a few years was that how we looked at the beginning of the school year stood in stark contrast to how we looked at the end of the year. Educators are often called to the work, and it often comes, we give it everything typically, but that often comes at the expense of our own well-being and self-care. And the research really shows that teachers experience the highest rates of daily stress among any professional group, tied with nurses and greater than physicians. So it's really important that we take a look at and be very intentional about focusing on self-care, because it's very clear from the research, and for those of you who are teachers, we know this, it's an embodied experience of feeling stress. So we need to resource ourselves, and that's what we're going to talk about today. One of the best definitions of self-care that I know comes from Audre Lorde, who is a social justice activist, librarian, and writer. And she said, caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation. And that is an act of political warfare. Another entry point into thinking about self-care, and I share this a lot, is that familiar message we get on the airplane that we should secure our own oxygen masks before securing someone else's, because if we were to run out of oxygen, we wouldn't be able to help someone else. When I get asked by teachers, teacher candidates, teacher educators, and administrator, what is the most powerful mindfulness strategy for the classroom? My answer is always the same. It's your practice. Even if teachers do not, or parents don't introduce mindfulness to children, there will be a ripple effect in the classroom because our nervous systems as educators, we're at the helm. And so my good friend Dana Chapman calls it the heartbeat of the classroom. And I like to think of it as the nervous system of the classroom. We set the tone. And what we know from stress contagion, research around mirror neurons, if we are feeling calm, if we are feeling at ease, our students are going to feel at ease. And it's a reciprocal relationship. We know as teachers and educators, when our students are stressed, it elevates our stress. So it's beneficial for both us and for students when we are feeling more calm. So this brings me to mindfulness as one entry point. There are a number of ways to take care of ourselves. Mindfulness is one of those. And for those of you in the room who might be new to mindfulness, it's an innate capacity we all have to pay full and conscious attention in the moment. We all have that capacity. It's the quality of presence we bring to everything we do. The problem is the quality of that presence isn't really very good for all of us. We spend a lot of time in this sort of default mode of being a time traveler, thinking about the past, worrying about the future. And one of the examples I like to share is because most of us have had the experience of driving or being in a car, going from point A to point B, and having little or no recollection of what we passed along the way. That's called mindlessness. And we're often in that default mode. Our minds get hijacked. The thing is, the research shows, a Harvard study showed that our minds wander 47% of the time, which means we're spending almost half of our waking hours thinking about something other than what we're doing or where we are. And the research showed that this impacts our happiness levels negatively and impacts our resilience and level of stress. So it's important to think about how we can be more mindful and do less mind wandering to impact our levels of our resilience and our ability to put our attention where we want it to be and keep it there. So mindfulness practice, though we have the innate capacity for mindfulness, the more that we practice mindfulness, the better we can become at being mindful. Think of it as a skill that can be practiced and strengthened every day. So if you think about exercising your mind, your body to keep it healthy and resilient, we can do the same thing for our brains to keep them healthy, resilient, and strong. So mindfulness is, the roots of it goes, contemplative practices that go back thousands of years. We think about mindfulness in school settings, in university settings, in companies, in professional sports, as more of skill building. It's secular in nature, and that's what we think about when we bring mindfulness into schools. So what most people are familiar with is mindful breathing. And breathing in the mindfulness practice is the anchor or home base for our attention. So think about a boat that drops an anchor to keep it in place if it starts to drift away. If the waters get wavy, the boat will wander, but the anchor will always make sure to gently bring it back over and over again. That's the same with a mindfulness practice. We choose an anchor for our attention. Most people are familiar with the breath. That's not always most comfortable for everyone. So an anchor can be the sounds that you hear, the feeling and sensations in your body, using any of your senses. Any of those things can be an anchor or home base for your attention. The point of mindfulness is to choose one of those as an anchor and to continually bring your awareness and attention back to that anchor. That's the practice. The more we bring our attention back, and you will bring it back because it will wander. That's the nature of the mind. Expect it to. That's part of the practice. When you bring your attention back, you're strengthening those neural pathways in the brain. It's the leaving and being distracted and coming back. That's the practice. Like lifting and dropping a weight. You need to drop the weight to lift it up to strengthen your bicep. It's the same thing in a mindfulness practice. When your mind wanders and you bring it back, you're strengthening your brain. One of my favorite ways of understanding this comes from Jon Kabat-Zinn, who compares thinking and mindfulness as a waterfall. So if you were to imagine that you're near or observing a waterfall, Niagara Falls, for example, if you've had that opportunity, if you were in the midst of the waterfall, you would be at the mercy of wherever it goes. But if you were to find a vantage point behind the waterfall where you could safely observe, then you wouldn't be drawn into it. And it's the same thing with mindfulness and thinking. If we are in a vantage point, and that's what mindfulness does for us, it gives us the opportunity to observe our thinking without taking the bait, without being drawn in. We can observe. So in a mindfulness practice, we sort of observe our thoughts as though they're going across a stage. We don't jump on stage. We just observe as they come and they go. And that's the basis of mindfulness practice. And Jon Kabat-Zinn says, we still see and hear the water, but we are out of the torrent. So I just wanted to invite you into just a moment of mindfulness, just to get a sense of it if you haven't practiced yourself. But I'm sure there are a few people in our group today that have had a mindfulness practice and have even brought it into the classroom. So I'm going to invite you and it's an invitation, of course, it always should be, to close your eyes or let your gaze drop. Eyes open is fine too. And this will just be for a moment. And to just notice your body as it rests in the surface, if you're sitting on your chair or on the couch or on the floor. Just notice the touch points of your body as it rests on the surface. You might notice your feet as they make contact with the floor, or your arms as they rest in your lap or at your sides. And when your mind wanders, just bring your attention back to focusing on your body. That's your home base for your attention. Now I'm going to invite you to switch your attention to what you can hear. Allow the sounds, the coming and going of what you hear, be the anchor for your attention now. What you hear in your room, through your speakers as you listen to my voice, outside of the room where you are, allow that to be your home base. And then finally, I'll invite you, if it's comfortable, to bring your awareness now to your breathing. Notice as you breathe in and breathe out. You might notice the rise and fall of your belly, or the rise and fall of your chest. Just allow your breath to be the home base for your awareness. And rest your awareness and your attention there until you hear the sound of the bell. Okay. So that was just a moment or two of mindfulness. And some of what you might have been feeling there, people often say they feel a sense of calm. They feel tired because you start to notice how tired you are, maybe a little relaxed, sometimes agitated. And the agitations oftentimes will come up because we have an expectation of how the practice should be. If you start to feel very uncomfortable, then you know it's time to take a break. But oftentimes it's a sense of calm, relaxation, and maybe some frustration because you think you're not supposed to be distracted. But that's part of the practice. The distraction is part of the practice. So I just wanted to take a moment here to say that when we invite adults or children into practice, especially with teachers, and I'll talk a little bit about this if I have a moment at the end. We want to make sure that we are bringing mindfulness in not as a bypass or as a replacement for thinking about how we can, thinking about our teaching work as equity work. We have a number of, we are in unprecedented time right now with the pandemic, economic hardship, ongoing racial injustice, and Black and other racialized groups of people are disproportionately affected by this. So our mindfulness practice is offered in the classroom not as a bypass or a replacement. It's in tandem with doing equity work in the classroom. Mindfulness can help to resource children, can help to resource teachers to be able to do that very important work. Just breathe. We often hear just breathe, and sometimes people get irritated. What do you mean just breathe? I'm breathing. I do it all the time. Most people can breathe without support and without having to think about it. We actually breathe on average 960 breaths every hour, 23,000 breaths a day, and mostly we do without even thinking about it. But we can use the breath intentionally and attentionally to calm our nervous systems down. Intentionally focusing on the breath. So this is when you are manipulating your breath just somewhat. If throughout your day you are remembering to take 3 slow, conscious, and deep breaths, and often it starts with breathing in through your nose, noticing the slight pause at the end of your in-breath, and then breathing out through your mouth, extending your out-breath just a little longer. If you do that for 3 cycles, breathing in through your nose, pause, breathing out through your mouth, extend your out-breath, you tap into that relaxation response called the parasympathetic nervous system of the body. It sends the message to your body that it's okay to feel calm. So doing that throughout your day will calm you in the moment, but it also trains your body to remember what it's like not to be in fight or flight or not to be in constant vigilance, which, given our reality today, we're being called upon to be very vigilant just as a matter of taking care of ourselves. But we need to have those moments where we remind our body what it is like to feel calm, and just taking 3 conscious, slow and deep breaths. When we make our breath deeper, slower, more quiet, and more regular, we tap into that relaxation response. The attentional breath is what we just did there at the end of that previous practice, where we just focus on the breath. We don't manipulate it in any way. We just notice the rise and fall of our belly, the rise and fall of our chest, or the breath coming in and out of our nose. And when we focus on that, allow that to be our anchor, become distracted, because you will, and bring your attention back again. Eventually that taps into, oftentimes, that relaxation response. 5-finger breathing is another exercise that uses the breath, but there are some folks that aren't comfortable focusing on the breath for a whole host of reasons. This allows adults and children, this is something I do, I know adults have done this as well. 5-finger breathing gives us an opportunity to have a tactile cue and a visual cue for our attention as we're focusing on the breathing. So 5-finger breathing, which is a favorite of students, invites us to start with our finger at the bottom of our wrist, and you draw your finger up. So there's the tactile experience and movement as we breathe in. Slight pause, and then exhale as we draw our finger down the inside of our thumb. And then again, breathing in as we draw our finger up, and then breathing out after a slight pause as we draw our finger down. So that's 5-finger breathing. I've seen children do this exercise when we were in the classroom with their hands underneath the desk. I've seen adults do this as well. It's a tactile and visual way to focus our attention on our breath without having to think about our breath as we do that. Actually, I'm going to share just with one more moment. I'm going to go back here. One other activity that I think is a favorite of students of mine as well. I have one of these in my office at home and at work. I haven't been to work for a while because I'm working from home, but this is a Hoverman sphere. And it actually mimics the expanding and contracting of the lungs. And it's a nice way to sort of give a visual for breathing in and breathing out. And kids love this. If you're in the physical classroom, I know some of you are teaching back in the school, some of you are teaching remotely, so it can be used either way. We can create our own sphere with our hands. So if you put your hands together and your thumbs together, and then you draw your palms out while keeping your thumb and your fingers together. This is the inhale as you expand the sphere, and exhale as you contract the sphere. So inhale and exhale. And so we and children can be invited to make their own sphere. And literally it can go wherever they are because they have their hands with them. And the same thing for 5-finger breathing. By the way, the Hoverman sphere you can get on Amazon, or Mastermind sells them. They're a little expensive at Mastermind, but they do have them. Just a couple of considerations as we wind up here for introducing mindfulness into the education setting. Begin with your own practice. I can't stress this enough. Having your own understanding and a practice will not only have a ripple effect in the classroom if you never bring it into with your students, but it also gives you that embodied understanding when you're going to introduce and lead mindfulness in the classroom. Be invitational. It should never be, students should always have the option to do mindfulness. Communicate with parents often, always, and often, and let them know that it's secular in nature. Daily practice. If you do mindfulness just for a few minutes every day, it doesn't have to be a very big program at all. And within my book, I have very brief practices. Just 5 minutes every day, 5 days a week is much better and much more impactful than half an hour 3 times a week. It's every day that changes the structure and function of the brain. Social justice and social change lens, which is what I mentioned before. We want to bring mindfulness into a classroom that is culturally responsive and has equity at the forefront. Differentiate for diverse needs, have reasonable expectations, provide opportunities to debrief, and implement trauma-sensitive mindfulness, meaning that sometimes there are some children that might be uncomfortable focusing on their breath for some reason, or some of our students may be triggered by mindfulness. It doesn't cause trauma, it doesn't cause difficulties, but it can trigger some uncomfortable feelings. So making sure we allow students the option of the kinds of mindfulness they practice, or to take a break if it starts to feel overwhelming for them. Here are just some read alouds if you're teaching younger students or middle school students. These are just some of my favorite books that are excellent read alouds, but also even for middle school children and even high school children. I read these to my teacher candidates at Boise. And a few resources for you. So the Greater Good in Education at the University of California is an excellent resource. They have a whole host of resources on social emotional learning and a whole section on mindfulness. Mindful Schools has a lot of resources as well. My website, Fostering Mindfulness, the publisher Pembroke put together a 15-page sampler of some of the activities and the Blackline Masters from my book. There are some printables, a lot of printables in there for you. You can download it from there or from Pembroke's website. I also recorded a couple of practices, a 10-minute guided, 10-minute body scan and a 7-minute guided practice for adults and for teenagers. 10% Happier. So this is some of you might be familiar with this. There's a podcast and there's an app, and there are so many wonderful apps out there. This one is my favorite because they have world-class teachers. It's based in research. It's inclusive, equity-minded. And for any of the teachers in the group, and I assume there are many of us, when the pandemic started, Dan Harris, who had a live panic attack on TV, came to mindfulness that way. And so he runs 10% Happier. It's based on a book he wrote. He's offering the app for free, and I think it's for 6 months for frontline workers and for teachers. He understands the value of teaching work. So if you go to 10percenthappier.com/care, there's an option there to just answer a couple of questions, and then you can download the app. I'm not affiliated with the app. I don't make any money from the app. I just think it's one of the best out there, and I love that they've thought and value teachers. A few books, you'll see mine there, Fostering Mindfulness, that has guiding scripts, activities, and printables. The Inner Work of Racial Justice by Rhonda McGee, Healing Ourselves and Transforming Our Communities Through Mindfulness. I had an opportunity to do 3 days of training with Rhonda McGee. She's focused on social justice and mindfulness. Trauma Sensitive Mindfulness by David Trelevin, and The Mindful School by Patricia Jennings. Those are just a few of the resources that are my favorites and I think are quite impactful. So I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank you for taking the time. Something's called you to be here to focus on self-care. And self-care is self-preservation, and it's the least selfish thing you can do to focus on your own self-care. Thank you, and great to be with you.
Shelley, thank you, thank you very much. That was very good, and we were talking before about how hard it is to put that into 30 minutes, and you could just feel like there were so many more directions we could go in that period of time there.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
there are a couple thoughts in the in the chat. Maybe if we've got time for at least one or two of them, I'll also mention, because the question came up there, the resources that you listed there. I'll make sure that in the mail, when the recording is released, those resources are there as well. So folks, you'll get links to all of that information as well that Shelley had in here. But there was one question, and you kind of talked about this, but again, in the time we had, it's hard to cover everything. But maybe if you could a minute or two to just kind of some thought on the question is around what strategies and resources are there to support culturally informed practices and mindfulness pertaining to racialized students, particularly Black and Indigenous students? I know that you had some resources even just kind of listed there, I think, that were leading in that direction, but
Mhm.
do you have any additional thoughts on that?
Yeah, thank you. It's such a great question. We know, and I mentioned this before, that folks who are Black and other racialized folks are disproportionately being impacted by the historical circumstances, from the pandemic to economic hardships, ongoing racial injustice. That is not new. It is ongoing. But
Mhm.
but we do know that oftentimes, here's what the research shows, that mindfulness actually helps to resource specifically for folks who are going through trauma, who are going through some of these experiences that can be very traumatic and taxing on our nervous systems, increase of stress, increase of anxiety. So it's going to have the same positive impact for all groups. I would say that, just because we're in limited time, if you go to fosteringmindfulness.com, I have a whole section on some wonderful thought leaders related to mindfulness who are from the BIPOC community, who are thought leaders in this area, talking about the intersection of mindfulness and culturally responsive work, and working in terms of equity and racial justice. Lama Rod Owens, Rhonda McGee. There are a whole host. I have them listed there, and links to podcasts and interviews. I'd
That
suggest going there. Yeah.
That sounds great. I mean, it's all through your talk. There's this sense of the nervous system, and yet everything that's going on right now, it seems like it's impacting on everyone's nervous system, and so it's having those tools available just seems so valuable as the kids are coming back to our classroom, and for ourselves as well. Which, you mentioned many times. I think we're really bad as educators. We look after everyone else, right, not ourselves. So
That's right. Yes,
yeah.
that's right. That's why it's important to think of self-care as the most unselfish thing that you can do.
Yeah, I really like that. I really, really like that. And
Uh,
I don't know if guys are different. I have no idea, but it's a good reminder for me for sure. So thank you. Yeah. Great. Thank you, Shelley. We really appreciate you taking the time today to join us and share some of your thoughts around mindfulness. And I'll just leave you with the last word for the group.
yeah, I would say, I'm going to reiterate it because I don't think especially educators can hear it enough. Self-care is you are resourcing yourself to take care of yourself and for others. So it's the least selfish thing that you can do to focus on your self-care. Take care. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Lionel.
Great. Thank you. Well, folks, we'll move on to our second presenter of our session together today. And it's my pleasure to introduce Lisa Bush. And when I met Lisa and I'd read her bio, the first thing that struck me is about the first 6 words in your bio that says you're a fourth generation educator. And it reminds me of all the Thanksgivings and Christmas and other holiday dinners when family came together. The whole room was teachers. And it's like, I don't know what it is about generations of teachers that we seem to stick together. So it's great to have you here. But Lisa is a fourth generation educator who understands the need for and is passionate about teacher wellness. She has taught for more than 15 years in classrooms and has been an administrator in that time as well, and has taken that experience and her understanding of teacher wellness and presents internationally on language arts, fine arts, gifted education, as well as the part we're here for today around teacher wellness. She lives and works in Calgary, Alberta, so I'm hoping on your drive to work every once in a while you get to see those beautiful Rocky Mountains, because that's always good for my wellness whenever I see those. And finally, her book on teacher wellness called Teaching Well was published by Pembroke in 2019. So Lisa, it's great to have you here, and we're looking forward to spending some time with you over this next little bit. So I'll pass the virtual mic over to you and let you get started.
Okay, well, thank you, Lionel. Thank you, Shelley. That was the most relaxing 20 minutes I think I've had in a long time. So thank you for your presentation. And thanks to Pembroke Publishers for helping make this all happen. And finally, to the teachers that are watching, I want to say a huge thank you, because it is September. I have been in education for 16 years, and September's, we're trying to usually just stay above water. So the fact that you have carved some time out of your schedule to be here with me is very important. So I hope we enjoy, we connect. I'll share some thoughts with you on wellness, and hopefully there are things that you can take with you and really kind of hold on to or use as we go throughout this challenging and we just can't predict it this school year. So I just thank you for being here. But before we dive into some strategies, and I know I always love strategies. I'm like, tell me what to do, and I'll do it. Before we get there, I want to touch on two deeply held beliefs that I have about education. And Shelley very much spoke to the first one, but I think it's so important. I am going to mention it again. It's something that took me over a decade of teaching to understand. And it's the idea of self-care is not for yourself. Self-care is not for yourself. I think a lot of times as teachers, I've worked both in the United States and in Canada and public school systems there. This is a widespread belief, I think. As teachers, the teacher who stays the longest, who gets there the earliest, who has the most beautiful bulletin boards, who has, the Instagram picture ready classroom wins. And we're the best teachers. And that's not true. Um, I think that a lot of times we think we're great teachers based on the numbers of hours we work. And what I came to learn, and this all was very apparent when I started, um, my, I had my daughter 6 years ago. And so this all really came to light with me when I was now trying to juggle a family and teaching, that self care was not for myself, that I was a more compassionate, more attentive, more alert, more in the present teacher when I had gone to the gym the night before and when I had gotten 8 hours of sleep the night before. The same can be said for me as a parent. The same could be said for myself as a spouse. And it could be said for you as well. Um, and so one thing I invite teachers to do, and this is something in a regular presentation I would spend a while on. We have 20 minutes, so I feel like I'm just touching the surface. But think of your self-care as part of your professional duties. Think of it as part of your professional obligation. And once you start to see how transformative it is, um, you're going to tap into that with your students. And I'll give you an example. Like I said, about 6 years ago, when this beautiful girl came into my life, I had my daughter, I really started to tap into my own self-care and my students' self-care. So I realized that when my students had their heads down on their desks with their hoodies up, or were non-responsive, or were just not really giving me 100%, I started to tap into their wellness. And that's not something I had done as a teacher. I'd start asking, have you had breakfast today? What did you have for lunch? Did you get a good sleep last night? And when I saw it as a class, it got to the point where I'd say, all right, guys, let's all get on our jackets and let's go outside and let's do a few laps around the soccer field. Because when I realized my self care was so that I could be a better teacher, it was to make me the best possible teacher that I could be. My students also needed that self care to be the best possible student. And I use it with my husband as well. I'm like, please go for a walk. Take care of yourself. It's not for you, it's for me. So I think we need to embrace the idea that self care is not for ourselves. Self care is for us, our students, our coworkers, our school communities, our own family, our own friends, and not necessarily in that order. Think of it as a professional work obligation. And I think when you go into the school year with that, hopefully it will make a bit of a switch in your mindset. This was a reminder. I put it up against, it was hanging on the wall last year. It was right above my computer screen. So when I looked up at 5 o'clock, it was a reminder. I need to get my keys, I need to get my coat on, and I need to walk out of the school, no matter what my desk looks like, because self care is for my school. It's not only for me. And the second thing I think we need to kind of acknowledge going into this, and it seems so obvious, but I think we need to sit with it for a moment, is teaching is difficult. And I made this slide in 2019. And in retrospect, 2019 seems like a spa vacation getaway compared to what we're dealing with 2020, with the uncertainties, with the remote learning, with the hybrid learning, with the person-to-person social distance learning. Or like, I'll take 2019. Teaching was difficult last year. It's almost impossible this year. And so if you're sitting here tonight feeling frustrated, thinking, wow, we're 2 weeks into school and I'm already exhausted, I'm already tired. What's wrong with me? What am I doing wrong? I think we need to release that guilt, and we need to kind of release some of that self-doubt and just acknowledge the work we do is incredibly challenging. So let's speak to some strategies that we can maybe lean on this year. These are all just thoughts, these are all just ideas. I know when we're working at a place from overwhelm, which many educators are in September, the last thing you want is someone saying, and here's more for you to do. So please take all of these as suggestions. Some you might connect with, some might speak to you, and some you might say, you know what, I just can't take that on right now. And that's fantastic. But the first thing that I have leaned on heavily, I'd say for the past 4 years or so, is figuring out what I want my self-care intention to be for the school year and write it down. This occurred to me about 4 years ago when we get into the school year, and every once in a while we kind of surface and put our head up and look around and say, okay, how am I doing physically? How am I doing mentally? I haven't really tapped in. And I realized I didn't know how I was doing because I didn't really have clear expectations of what I needed to be doing or where I needed to be. So, for example, at the beginning of last year is my first year as an assistant principal. And so I thought, you know what, I'm going to keep it pretty basic, pretty simple. My self-care goal for myself is to move or to exercise 3 times during a school week and then 1 time during the weekend. And that was just as much for my mental health as it was for my physical health. And I have a self-care journal because, yes, I am that type of person. And so every day I would just write at the bottom of my journal, I moved 50 minutes. I moved 30 minutes. Some days it was just going for a walk around the track right by our school. Some days it was going to the gym. You could write it at the bottom of your teacher planner. And so I could kind of get a feel for how I was doing. I had a very tangible goal. But be realistic with your goal. When everything shut down in March and I was suddenly a full-time assistant principal and my husband was a full-time professor, and we were with no daycare, no school for my kindergarten daughter, I quickly looked at my intentions and redid them. And my intention for the spring was to keep my mental health at a functioning level. And so when you write your intention, be very realistic about what is going to work for you with your current situation. Do not think that, this is the year you need to run a half marathon just because that's what you feel like you should do. But pause and just kind of look inside and see what it is that you really need to be the best version of yourself this year. So once you think about what you would like to be your intention for the year, you need to plan. And one belief I have is wellness doesn't exist in a vacuum. So if you're living with family members, if you have a spouse, a partner, if there are other people in your household, they're a part of your planning time. And my husband and I have been doing this now for about 2 years. We're on a Sunday, we sit down and we look, okay, I'll be going to the gym these mornings, you're going to the gym these afternoons, and we all come together as a family to make that happen. So to get it down on paper. And my advice is that you only plan 1 week at a time, because beyond Friday, who knows? Beyond right now, who knows really? So just take it one week at a time and plan it. But then once you have planned it, that's an event. That's an actual thing. So pretend like maybe you're going for a walk in a nearby park on a Thursday afternoon. You've planned that for next week. Treat that like you would a dentist appointment that you've waited a long time to get into. So if a parent popped up in your school and said, "Hi, Miss Bush, can I talk to you for a few minutes about my son or daughter? I have some concerns." If I had a dentist appointment, I would have no problem saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I would love to. Can you please email me some times? Let's meet later this week, and we can definitely talk about it, but I have an appointment I have to get to." Treat your wellness times like an appointment. Okay. So last year, there was a coworker that I collaborated quite a bit with. And she was teaching during the school day. I was teaching during the school day. We never saw each other. And at some point during the day, I saw her. And I just said, "Hey, we had a bit of an incident today. I'd like to kind of run it through with you, get some feedback. Can you meet me in my office right after my bus supervision?" And she said the coolest thing. She said, "Lisa, I'm so sorry. I have planned sheltered self-care time at the gym. I'm leaving after school. Can we meet first thing in the morning tomorrow?" And I didn't even answer her because I was like still stuck on, wow, that was awesome. And then I was like, I want to leave and go to the gym. It was contagious. It was this beautiful thing. But do not feel guilty about saying, "No, I'm sorry. I can't take this phone call. I can't run down to the office. I can't do this last minute thing because I have this planned." It's an event, it's a thing. This, I think we're going to lean on a lot this year, and it's acknowledging our current season. So I've been speaking about wellness for a while, and I've always said we're all on a path to wellness, and we're all on different parts of the path. Some of us are here, some of us are here. It's fine. That's where we are. And even to take the analogy further, individually, we all have different seasons of our wellness, and we kind of need to tap into that and acknowledge where we are. This applies to your wellness. It also applies to you as a teacher, and I'd say it applies to your students. I know right now it can be very frustrating when we look at what we were doing last September. You can think, "Oh, I'm a grade 1 teacher. This time last year, I was doing all sorts of small group, student-centered collaborative work. We had hands-on manipulatives. We were interacting. We were moving around the classroom. There was flexible seating." Yes, that was last year. And I think it sounds easy, but it's going to be a continual practice to keep saying, "And this is where we are this year." I think if we keep looking back at where we were health-wise last year, or where our students were, and our students are here this year, at where our teaching practices were last year, it is not going to be conducive to healthy physical and mental health. And so I think just acknowledging this is where I am, this is where I'm starting from this year. Let's meet ourselves where we are and then move forward there. Set gravity problems aside. So this is a really cool concept that I read about a few years ago. And I thought, if I knew this when I was 20, it would have probably saved years of my life of me trying to fix what designers call gravity problems. So this is from a book, Designing Your Life. And gravity problems is actually a design term that designers use when they're looking at a design challenge and how are they going to tackle it. And the idea is that gravity problems are problems you can't change. Okay, you can't change gravity. You would have to relocate the Earth's orbit to pull it off. Skip it, accept it. And when you accept it, you can then look into the things that you can change. So if you take, for example, the sentence, teaching during COVID is highly stressful. The COVID part is a gravity problem. It is a global pandemic. There is no amount of work that you or I can do to directly alter that. So to take the COVID part out, we have the teaching and the extremely stressful part. And we look at that, and then it's like, well, these are things we can change. The extremely stressful part. Do I need to ask my family to help out more? Do I need to start saying no when I'm asked to take on obligations? Do I need to sit down with an administrator and share with them my thoughts? Do I need to look for a therapist that I relate with that can help me work through this challenging year? These are all within our control. And I find it very freeing and very empowering to say, let's take what's out of our control, put it here. I actually got up at 3 a.m., I think, one morning this spring, and I thought, I've just got to figure this out. So I made a column, things I cannot control, and I just made a list. And then I wrote down things I can control, and I made a list. And just that practice was very empowering. I'm going to offer this up. I'm going to set this aside. This is out of my control. And then I'm going to look at this, and this is what I'm going to start to kind of delve into. And then the last thing, which again, Shelley touched on, be the voice for your wellness. And I realized this early on. Your administrator will never call you into your office and say, Lisa, sit down, we need to talk. I've noticed you haven't been getting 8 hours of sleep. And I noticed you've been skipping on your daily walks, which really calm you down. And I think you need to add that to your personal growth plan. Like, that will never happen. You have to be a relentless advocate for your own wellness. And I've done it. You can ask with my coworkers, you can ask the principals that I've worked for, you can ask my husband, my children. You have to be your own advocate. And the really beautiful thing about that is when you're well and you're strong, you can then go in and do the work that we love to do as teachers. And that's helping those kids that need us the most, helping, to work against ongoing racial injustice, going to do the things that light us up, right? And the things that we're passionate about. We can do that when our mind and our body is physically well. I love this quote by Richard Wagamese. It's take the first step and try to make it beyond. And I have his book on my nightstand. I read through it, and then I just go back and I reread it. And there were so many mornings where I would just lie in bed and I'd say, okay, Lisa, we're going to get out of bed and we're going to take the first step and we're just going to make it beyond. We're not even going to think what's coming after that. So when you look at wellness, it doesn't have to be this big, intimidating type project. It can just be setting an intention, and then let's just take very small steps. The author of Big Magic, Elizabeth Gilbert, who I love, and she influenced some of my writing in my book, Teaching Well, but she was saying, I think it was last night. She was saying during the pandemic, she's just been taking it one breath at a time. And I thought, wow, one breath at a time. So, to kind of conclude, I'd like to leave you with a thought. And the thought was by Michelle Norris, who is an American journalist. And she said it to Michelle Obama on the Michelle Obama podcast that I was listening to this summer. And she said, the great pause, referring to COVID, the great pause needs to be the great recalibration. And then she said, don't reach for normal, reach for better. And so I just like to invite you as educators, if there was ever a time to start advocating for your health and wellness, if there was ever a time to start saying, we're not trying to go back to how it was because it wasn't that great, like normal was not that great. Let's see if we can reach for better. Let's see if we can shift things. I think now's the time. So I thank you for your time. I want to be respectful of it. I hope that you can walk away with at least one belief, one idea, one strategy that you can lean on this school year. And thank you for sharing your time with me.
Thank you, Lisa. Wow, that was very practical. I was sitting here trying to answer all your questions in my own mind as you were talking, and it got me thinking a little bit in there. And people are saying like, "Oh, what a great idea!" In when you called something an event, and sort of made it, gave practical examples. Everything you were sort of talking about though was tied to me or to the people here, to whoever you're talking to. Is once you kind of find your space in that, are you able to reach out to other people that you like, friends, colleagues, the person next door to you who's having a tough go of it? Is this something that's too personal, or can you reach out to others and say, hey, this is working for me?
Oh, well, I actually have been. You mean like, Lionel, just to make sure I'm understanding, to share
Mhm.
with them my own journey, my own self-care journey? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, yeah. Do you
Mhm.
think that's helpful for people, or do they need to step back on their own terms and say, okay, I'm going to consider this piece now?
Yeah, well, a friend of mine said this, not in regards to wellness. Interestingly enough, she said it in regards to racial injustice, but it answers your question beautifully. She said to me, Lisa, your job is not to convert, your job is to shine a light.
Hmm.
And so I don't think you need to like go to your neighbor and be like, "Hey, I've noticed you're looking tired."
Yeah.
Like, come on, let me.
Yeah.
But just be the teacher that shows up at school, and instead of saying, "Oh, I was up until midnight last night, making an online virtual class," to say, "Oh, I had a great night last night. I tucked my kids to bed. I got 8 hours of sleep." Just being the light shines, it illustrates for others. And Lionel, I'll kind of just build on that. I do think that our stories have the power to transform other people's lives. And I have started a blog and a podcast. It's all, if you go onto my website, lisabush.ca, it's all there. But that's the whole idea, Lionel, is to share
Mhm.
my story and to share other women's. It is focused towards women, other
Right.
women's story on wellness, so that we can just shine a light and talk about our struggles and challenges. And then that will inspire change. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe I know we're coming near the end of our time, but I'm curious about that last bit. We said it's shining the light on women. It, it seems like, and maybe it, being the male part of this conversation here, do you find guys maybe sometimes go, yeah, it's like flossing. Yeah, 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 I'll floss. But then they kind of push it over to the side. Like that's why when you said event, that was concrete. Oh, I like that idea, right? But do men need to pay more attention to this? I guess that's my question, because I'm not sure they do.
Well, Lionel, I think it depends on the man.
Yeah.
I can speak to my husband, and I know we both were very similar in that we were both working way too much.
Yeah.
And so we've both had to lean on each other on self care times. And as a father, it was very hard for him. He'd say, no, 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 I'll be with the kids, or
Yeah.
I'll come home early. I'll pick the kids up early from daycare. And I actually had to fight back and say, no, I'll pick up the kids. You go to the gym. I think it depends on the person, but I know my husband has experienced similar challenges.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair. Great. Good. Well, thank you very much. That was a very enjoyable half an hour just listening. And again, the practical thoughts. I'm busy writing notes here as well. So thank you on behalf of everyone here, Lisa, today. Thank you very much. And I'd just like to leave the last moment for you. Just any closing thoughts for the group of us today?
We all need you to take care of yourself and to be strong. So you have a lot of people leaning on you, a lot of people counting on you. So please take care of yourself.